This presentation covers how to transfer values from a database to a PLC using open automation software. If you would like to follow along, you can download a 30-day trial from the website openautomationsoftware.com. Then visit the knowledge base under the support menu for additional resources. You can find a guide in the section for database connectors. For the recipe transactions, another method for retrieving values from a database is by using database tags. This is bidirectional when paired with the data historian product to write to a database. Database tags are useful for creating a live user interface for a database value from a specific table and column. When transferring values to a PLC, the recipe feature is best for transactional processing. The typical process involves a controller or PLC device requesting a specific dataset from a database. The values are then transferred to the controller. The OAS engine conducts a thorough verification to ensure that the values received from the controller match those in the database. Once verification is complete, the OAS engine sends a confirmation to the controller indicating that the transfer was successful. Data destinations can be configured in open automation software using any of the data connectors or device connectors. The most popular device connectors are Allen Bradley, Modbus, and Siemens. Data connectors allow you to transfer values to an OPCUA or OPCDA server. In IoT connectors, MQTT and SparkPlug-B are commonly used. Databases can also serve as a destination for recipe transactions. The data in the database can be organized in two formats from a table or view. Narrow table format, where the tag names that will be written to are contained within the table itself, so the mapping exists in the database table or view. A second column contains the values that will be transferred. Wide table format, more common, where you have an existing database table with a specific column for each value that will be transferred to the controller. In this presentation, we will demonstrate the transfer of values from SQL Server to a Modbus device using both wide and narrow table formats. Let's look at the tags already defined to a Modbus device under Configure Tags. This is where you set up your data destinations with the data source of the tags. Here, I have tags named Value 1, Value 2, and Value 3. Value 1 is mapped to a holding register in a Modbus device and is defined as a single float. Float 32. Each value tag is defined to its own destination in the Modbus device. A lot number is defined as an integer in a holding register of a Modbus device. This will be used to identify which record in the database will be retrieved. We also have a confirmation tag defined as a coil status for the Modbus device and an error tag defined as an integer number in a holding register. We'll explore the use of these later in the video, along with the query string that helps determine which record to retrieve. Select Configure Recipes to set up the first recipe group. Enter a unique name. I will call this one Wide Recipe, using the wide table format. The execution of the recipe can be event-driven, triggered by a changing Boolean or integer tag. Boolean tag, activated when it transitions from false to true. Integer tag, triggered by any non-zero change. If set to continuous mode, it will transfer values at a specific rate, minimum 1 second. You can also schedule a specific time of day. We will use event-driven execution. Let's define which Boolean or integer tag will trigger the transaction from a local or remote OAS engine. I will select the local engine and the trigger tag named trigger.value, which transitions from false to true to begin execution. Next, there's an optional parameter to enable confirmation. This will be defined as a Boolean tag, usually a variable in the controller to indicate the transfer was completed successfully. We also have the option to enable the error tag, set to an integer tag, error.value. The meanings of each of the error values are listed here. Click on the question mark to see this list. 0 means that there was no error in the recipe transaction, 1 means that there was no records found in the particular query, and the rest of the other designations of the types of failures of a recipe transaction. If you want the process to occur immediately without a full confirmation of the values being transferred back, you can enable the property to write all values without feedback. This will accelerate the recipe transactions. However, it does not fully ensure that the values being transferred to the PLC or controller have been successfully verified. In the Tags tab of the Recipe group, we will define the mapping for the wide table format. In this section, I will choose the tags to which I want to assign to the database columns. I will select value 1.value. I then put the column's field name in the database table from which I want to obtain the value. If we look at the example that we have defined here in SQL Server, I have a wide table format. That contains 4 columns. I have a lot number value, one value 2, and value 3. For value 1, I set the field name to value 01. The data type of the column in the database table is a single float. I will configure the other 2 values that are being transferred here. If you need to transfer several values, you can use the CSV export feature. Then, modify the data in Excel before importing it back. Alternatively, you can utilize our programmatic interfaces using .NET or the OAS REST API. You can find more information in our knowledge base under the Programmatic Interface section. Next, we will define what data in the database table should be obtained. Select the provider list to see which database engines you can transfer values from. In this example, we will use SQL Server. Obtain the SQL Server database connection directly from SQL Server Management Studio by copying and pasting it into the server name field. The database can also be remote. Define the name of the database. In this example, it is called recipe. The table in the wide table format is also called a recipe. With SQL Server, you can use Windows Authentication or SQL Authentication by unchecking this option. Add that recipe group to the configuration. The next step is to save recipe configuration. I will set the file name to Demo Recipes. If this is your first time saving the file, you will be prompted to set it as the default configuration when the system restarts. Select Yes, and you will see under the configure options that this file is now designated as the default recipe configuration to load when the OAS engine starts. We are ready to execute the recipe. To view all values associated with the tags, return to the tags configuration, select the group of tags, and right-click to choose Add to Watch. This action will open a watch window listing all tags and their current values. Select the trigger tag and write a value to true to the Modbus device. That will initiate the recipe transaction. We can observe that the values are written to the Modbus device and that those values are being successfully read back for this specific record. The values were obtained from only the top record in the dataset. It is crucial that you identify the specific record you intend to return. To do that, specify the query string. You can manually input the criteria to specify that the lot number equals 1, or we can utilize a dynamic query string, which is generally more common. In this case, we can enable a property that will define a string tag in the operating system engine, containing the where and order by statements. Select Apply Changes. If we examine the current query string, it shows that the lot number equals 0. Let's explore this tag in more detail. In the configuration section for tags, we can see it is a calculation tag that brings together the value of the lot number with a string constant where lot number equals, and then the lot number from the controller or the Modbus device in this example. To change that, select the lot number tag, and then write a value. Enter a value of 2 for the lot number. We can see that the query string has changed to where lot number equals 2. Let's trigger the recipe again. First, set the trigger tag to false, then set it to true again. We obtained the values from the second record where the lot number equals 2. Additionally, you can utilize the wide table format to apply aggregate functions for obtaining summary values from the database. If we examine the database connectors in the Getting Started Recipe section, we can see all the aggregate functions available for retrieving values from a database. You can also use dynamic tag aliasing to return multiple records and write to multiple tags in a wide table format. Let's use an aggregate function to calculate the average. Back in the Tags tab, we will change the field name by enclosing the column name in AVG. Click OK. For value 2, we can use the function mn. And value 3, we will use the function max. To retrieve all records, we will disable the query string, allowing us to return a complete dataset from the database and use the designated aggregate functions. Undefined. Let's apply the changes and proceed to the tags. Now let's trigger the recipe again. Set the trigger tag to false and then to true. The functions have returned the average for value 1, the minimum value for value 2, and the maximum value for value 3. Let's examine the narrow table format and how we would define it. I have an example table in SQL Server that contains 2 key columns. The tag name column containing the tags to which we want to write the values. Another column contains the values we want to transfer to each tag. The mapping is defined in the database table rather than in open automation software. Let's establish a narrow table transfer. First, we will disable the wide table format to prevent execution. Next, we will create a new recipe named narrow recipe and change the recipe type to narrow. Leave it as event-driven with the same trigger tag. In the Tags tab, there are two fields to define. One for the column where tag names will be written, and another for the column from which values will be taken. Into the Database tab, we need to change the table to where the tag names and values are defined. The table is called Recipe Narrow. Let's enable the query string with a tag so we can retrieve a specific set of records. If the lot number is equal to 1, we will return only the first 3 records, which correspond to the values 1, 2, and 3, along with the associated tag value. Under the Common tab, enable Recipe Active and select Add Recipe. That is now ready for execution. Select the trigger tag and write to the Modbus coil, and we can see the values are being transferred from this table, called Recipe Narrow, and it returned just the first 3 records. We can change the lot number to lot number 3, set the trigger tag to false, and then to true to trigger another recipe execution. It has returned the records, where the lot number is equal to 3. If you want to log each recipe transaction for troubleshooting data transfers, you can enable recipe transaction logging under Configure Options. System logging. Scroll down to see a property called Log Recipe Transactions, then scroll further down to specify the transaction path where the transaction files will be located. Visit openautomationsoftware.com to view our knowledge base for easy-to-follow steps to use the database connector with Industry 4.0 data sources, and download OAS to start your free trial today.